Well, here it is, episode 4, A New Hope of Isobar, the highs and lows of meteorology. Three chief meteorologists sitting around the Isobar doing a little bar talk weather-wise. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got Rich Ludeman out in Detroit, and of course, Emily Walls right down the road in Chicago, along with myself, chief meteorologist Rob Haswell here in Milwaukee. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, we're
Rob,
excited to be here for another round.
very excited, Rob
Episode
and
4.
Emily.
Yes, indeed. I'm starting off on a really grim, kind of a hard note to start off on, but we can't by any means pass over this because the flash flooding, the deadly floods that have been happening in Texas and is making news not only, nationally, but around the globe. What an incredibly tough scene to digest. Rich, you've covered a lot of this in your years. Is this How does this even rank when you see some of the pictures coming out of Texas?
It's staggering, to see, this amount of rain over a geographic area and the result of it. And, when I talk to people about these kinds of events, the truth is they can happen anywhere. It doesn't take a lot of terrain to get this kind of flash flooding. Even in Michigan, where we don't have mountains and great rivers moving through terrain, but back in the mid 1980s, there was flash flooding near Frankenmuth, near Vassar, Michigan. It's actually one of the historic flooding events in Michigan history, but there was loss of life, and so to see it happen in Texas, and then of course we see it when these landfalling hurricanes occur, it's just staggering to watch what Mother Nature can do. I don't know. It humbles me to the nth degree, and I hope it never happens here in Michigan. I hope it never happens, anywhere really. But
Yeah.
on my watch, I hope it never happens something like that. Does that make sense?
I
Makes
completely understand
sense.
what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and something that I've been really thinking about since the news of all of this came about is how can we do our jobs to get that messaging better, right? That's always the big conversation that we end up having as meteorologists after a big event like this. Were there any missteps? And in this point, it doesn't appear like there are. It's just how do we get that message to the public faster? Where do we fall within our role of doing that and relaying the alerts coming in? And unfortunately, everything that unfolded in Texas, it came through at such an awful time of day in the middle of the night when so many people are sleeping. So even if there were those messages going out, and we do know that there were flash flood emergencies being issued, when people are sleeping, there's a really good chance that they're not getting those. So again, it just kind of goes back to the question of like what can we do to prepare people ahead of time? But all of those boxes were checked by the National Weather Service there. And so I don't think anybody really knows the answer right now on what we can do better at this point. But at least I think a lot of conversations are really going to start happening again on how can we engage the public more to have an understanding of what can happen when things like this, or even if it's a small chance that it could happen in the forecast.
Save one life, whatever the case may be. I agree with you. Those are really important conversations to be had. And obviously, once, we get to a point where at least we're past the recovery stage, they're necessary to have. And I think there'll be a lot of things that we look back on and think could be improved. But I think it's really staggering to even think about it when you consider how much tech we have and how well we're able to communicate now in 2025 versus even 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and yet still there's a need to improve our messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be room for improvement. One really just crazy stat that has stuck with me when I was reading about everything that was happening down in Texas was the fact that the river rose 26 feet in 45 minutes. So again, even as those warnings were going out, that doesn't give people a lot of time to get out of the way. I don't know. I don't have the answers on what we can do at that point.
No,
You
you're
know,
right.
Rob, over all these years, I've been studying, I've been a student of meteorology. When we get these events that are outside the normal curve of what can happen, and you get these extreme events, Superstorm Sandy and the Mississippi flooding, back in the 90s. Sometimes there's no easy fix for these events that fall outside the curve of what we as scientists expect the norm can be, or even on the high end of what's normal, because this is outside of that. And I don't know, it just makes you ponder, how do we do better moving forward? All of us, not just meteorologists, but the emergency management and people. And I don't know. I don't know if there's an easy answer.
I think you're right, Rich. I mean, a lot of this isn't necessarily even the messaging in the moment, but even the greater messaging about, a little bit more respect for floods that we talk about, turn around, don't drown. Yet every single time we have flooding, we've got video of cars and trucks going through that flood water. And it seems like the public consciousness or memory for these things is short. I remember early 2000, mid 2000s, we had flooding, huge flooding in south central Wisconsin. Lake Delton, which is a man-made lake, got to the point where it burst its banks, took out a chunk of the interstate. And I remember for a short period there was a definitely a higher level of awareness and understanding of what flooding can do. But after a while, it kind of softens and it softens and it softens. And so, every once in a while, I guess we need to find ways to kind of bring that awareness up so that we're not, slow out of the gates when we hear things like flash flooding.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
All of our, thoughts and prayers and everything go out to those directly impacted, and we'll do everything we can in our community as meteorologists to, move the goal line or move the football forward toward that goal line of improving anything we can and working with our partners in emergency management and all of that. So yes, let's move on from there though, because while we haven't had anything even close, thankfully, to those situations there, we've had some interesting rounds of severe weather in our own backyards. Emily, do you want to start with what's going on in the Chicago area?
So in the Chicago area, we fortunately, in comparison to the last couple of years, I think a lot of people would say it's been quiet, but I think it's because the last 2 years we've been extremely heightened about severe weather. We had record breaking tornado years in 2023 and 2024. And this year, so far in the Chicagoland area, we've seen about 15 or 16 confirmed tornadoes, which is our average. That's very typical for a year in the Chicagoland area. Of course, we still have another half of the year to get through, so we're likely going to add to that number. But as far as tornadoes go, we've been doing okay. We haven't had anything that's been come through that's been extremely devastating, which is wonderful to be able to report on. But wind, that's really been a big one for us. A lot of our storms coming through, they've been wind makers. We've had microbursts. The most notable was actually in a town called Batavia over in Kane County, which is a very rural county. There was a lot of people kind of knocked out of power for quite a few days because of that, because of power lines down. There were 83-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and we actually had tennis ball sized hail, which is not common here. So that was kind of our biggest go around with severe thunderstorms and wind, especially here in our area.
We have had some interestingly large hail events this severe weather season here in Wisconsin as well. Tennis ball size hail, like you said. And again, on my side of the state line, microbursts, the straight line wind gusts have been incredibly powerful with these storms. We happened to get one right at one of our official reporting stations, Timmerman Airport, which is a smaller, mostly Cessna private jet kind of airport just outside of the Milwaukee metro area. It reported an 82-mile-per-hour wind gust. So first of all, the accuracy of that recording very high because it is an official weather station. Secondly, just was a really good spot in a way for us to kind of observe what happened. It flipped over planes, it took down power lines, and yeah, power was out for a good long stretch of time as well. So interesting that you bring up the micro bursts and the hail. That seems to be kind of overshadowing the usual headliner, if you will, of tornadoes this time of year. Let's go across Lake Michigan and check in with Rich. How's the severe season in the Detroit area?
So relatively quiet. The big gauge around here because, in our part of Michigan, it's very treed. I mean, there's a lot of trees, a lot of, full grown 40, 50, 60-foot trees. So even though we've had a couple of tornadoes, on the low end of the EF scale, in fact, we had one right in Fraser, which is a suburb, of the Metro Detroit area, but it caused very little damage. But the big gauge for us is the power outage numbers. So when we get these clusters of storms or lines of storms to come through, if we get 10, 20, 30 customers of DTE, that's the power company here, without power, that's a uh, that's a pretty small number, 10, 20, 30,000. We've had events where we've had 250, 300, 400,000 customers without power. Those are the large events. So far this spring and early summer, we've had a couple events in that 20 to 30,000 customer range, which, is a huge nuisance if you're one of those 20 or 30,000. And we've all been through it, the power outages and all of the gobbledygook that comes with it. But we've not had big numbers yet, and that's okay by me. Uh, I, I have a generator in my home, an old gas generator. So, and I have the power lines that are, elevated. So we've had them in my neighborhood, and I get the generator out, and I have a sump pump, and of course the fridge. It's a big, uh, it's a big nuisance when it happens. And so, thankfully, Rob and Emily, we've not had big numbers here in Southeast Michigan.
Hope that stays the case, obviously, but we've all kind of talked about power issues, and that kind of ties into our next subject about how incredibly hot it has been and the incredible strain that we're putting on our power grid because we are all cranking up the AC. Chicago, definitely, the heat's been incredible, Emily.
It really has. So, if we think way back to May, everyone was complaining, where is the heat? Where's summer? It was cloudy, it was rainy, what felt like every single day. We had below
On this
average.
podcast, we were complaining about where is
Yes.
the heat.
I know, I know. And then June came and, we kind of flipped the calendar over to meteorological spring or summer. And my goodness, Mother Nature agreed and turned the heat on. So in June in Chicago, actually, it was our sixth warmest June on record. And then the first 10 days or so of astronomical summer, we actually were the warmest on record by a long shot. So our average temperature, and this, of course, is including your highs and your lows, was 82 degrees for the first 10 days of summer. And unfortunately, you were just mentioning the power grid. We had actually a couple hospitals that the AC went out. So they had to transfer patients to another hospital, and then that hospital was having issues. So a lot of people have really been feeling the effects of the heat around here. And as of Monday the 7th, so July 7th, it was our first below average day that we've seen here in 3 weeks. So people were just, breathing it in, sitting outside, loving it, because it's been a really long stretch. And even talking about the 4th of July, I did a little bit of stats and looking up on how 4th of July here in Chicago usually stacks up, and only 18% of 4th of July is on record. So, 140 plus years of recorded temperatures, only 18% are 90 degrees or warmer. And again, this year we had that. We were just barely in the 90s, but we hit about 91, 92 degrees on the 4th. So the heat, it's been relentless here in the Chicago area.
It's a great way to put it, relentless, because here in the Milwaukee area, southern, well, even central and northern Wisconsin, we've had way more heat advisories than we typically would get. Haven't broken as many high temperature records as you might suspect with that, but we have broken, or at least tied, quite a few record warm lows. So the heat at night. And the thing with that, guys, is that you just don't get a break. Like you were saying, Emily, day after day after day, and night after night after night. So the AC is running 24/7 all day long, trying to keep us cool. And again, putting strain on the electric grid and obviously the human body. And the impact on human health is just astronomical. And there's been no relief for you over in Michigan either, Rich.
Rob, Emily, everything you say is right on the money. So when I'm at the chroma key wall and the co-anchors are jabbing me, we're the meteorologists. We
Yeah.
take our fair amount of jabs. It's all good. But my retort is, remember back in the middle of January when we were, complaining about the cold, the wind chill, everything's frozen over the roads. So it has been very warm here in Michigan. We've not actually set many daily record highs, but we did have a stretch of 4 days in a row of 90 plus degree weather a couple of weeks ago. And this past weekend for the 4th of July, it was quite warm. I had the luxury of being out on Lake St. Clair with friends who have a nice boat, and I actually went swimming in Lake St. Clair this weekend. The water is still a little on the cool side, but it is warming up. Um, but you know, Labor Day is 2 months away, so it goes fast. The heat is
Sure.
formidable, and it is. The heat is formidable, but soon enough, it's going to be football and Labor Day and blah blah blah.
It's true. So I guess we shouldn't wish it away too quickly. And Lake
No.
St.
Yeah.
Clair, Lake St. Clair is probably a little bit warmer than Lake Michigan right now. But you're right, the lakes are starting to warm up. And with this kind of heat, those numbers will go up pretty quickly for sure. All right, speaking of warm water, time to go down to the tropics. And it's been an interesting tropical season. Of course, we're full on into both the Pacific and Atlantic season. We've got Chantal to deal with right now, but the Pacific, of course, outpacing that. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on just in general how the tropics are playing out in this kind of lopsided start to the seasons.
So, from my perspective, it's been super interesting to watch in the Eastern Pacific because it's just been one after the other, after the other, after the other. But from the research that I've done, it doesn't seem like it's completely out of the ordinary to have this many systems trying to develop, but the strength of the systems, that's where the story is. So, as far as all of my research that I've done, Flossie was the earliest F named storm, so the sixth storm in the Eastern Pacific, named storm to have developed this year. That was the earliest on record. So that we are ahead of schedule there. But as far as how many become tropical depressions and the amount of systems, it seems to be fairly on par. It's just more about the strength. So those named storms, they're coming a little bit quicker than they usually do. And then I did have one other stat too about the Eastern Pacific that Flossie was actually the second major hurricane of the 2025 season. And that typically doesn't happen until mid-August. So we're way ahead of schedule with the major hurricanes that we've seen so far this year.
Makes you kind of start to worry about the latter part of the season when things do tend to get a little stronger because you've got the stronger or the warmer ocean water and the surface temperature is really cranking up. And maybe at that point, the Atlantic will start to play catch up as well. We are only at sea, Chantal here. And this Saharan dust has been kind of inhibiting things so far. Rich, do you think we're still on track for this huge season in the Atlantic?
I suspect so. We're still pretty early. We just had our 4th of July holiday, so we have 85% of the season still in front of us, and undoubtedly, by the time we get to the second week of August, we're going to have some activity. And we up here in the Great Lakes, we watch these things from afar. The Carolinas and Florida, and of course Puerto Rico, the Caribbean. I don't know. It always makes me a little uneasy, waiting for something to get going. And then when it does, where is it going to go? Is it going to be in Texas? Is it going to be Louisiana? I don't know. I feel for those parts of the country that get affected, directly, whereas we are more indirectly affected. It troubles me to see it happen. And thankfully, there have been years where it's a quiet year. But I don't know. We're waiting for something to happen, and probably it's going to happen.
Everybody's talking about AI, so I thought we had to have our turn talking about it too, because it has directly impacted what we do as meteorologists, and we're seeing, everything from AI weathercasters that are on
Mhm.
TV or on YouTube at the very least, all the way through to AI modeling. Now, I think this is interesting, guys, because AI is a different type of machine intelligence, right? But we have worked with numerical models for decades, which in a sense is the sort of artificial intelligence because we're giving the machine the data and letting it run the math and come up with an outcome. But now we're at a whole other level with this.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we have to keep a very close eye on. But I am a firm believer that we do have to embrace the way of the future, right? Otherwise, it's going to outpace us. So I do think it's important to try and use these new tools and see these new tools on how they can enhance what we do every single day, rather than being fearful of it and trying to push it off and be like, well, I'm better because of X, Y, and Z. We need to find a way to really incorporate that. But I do think, we can always improve. This is a science of constantly improving forecasting and data collection, and we still have a long way to go. So I think it's important that we do embrace all of these new things to try and just be the best that we can. And so far, thankfully, that we still kind of need the human interaction with those to make tweaks and corrections. And my little plug that I always tell people, you can watch your weather app all day long and you'll notice how it changes. And it's typically, if you were to write down that forecast at the beginning of the week and compare it to your local meteorologist, chances are we should we should be way more accurate than that. So that kind of gives you a glimpse into maybe what AI is capable of doing right now and why you should still trust your local meteorologist as well.
Rob, that's a great movie, Emily. That's a great movie, a title for a movie. Trust your local meteorologist. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, you could have, Brad Pitt, and you could have Meryl Streep. You could have all these great actors and actresses. That's a good flick. I would watch that movie. But Emily, you said it like this tide of AI is coming, and there's no stopping it. And mm, for what reason would we stop it anyway? This technological advance. So, let's see where it takes us. Obviously, with all of the data collection and all of the modeling that's done worldwide with, weather and weather data, it can only help improve the forecast. But in terms of presenting that forecast to a community or to a region, yeah, I'm going to stick with my local meteorologist every time. Every time, Rob.
Hopefully, that continues to be the case because you're right. I think, at this point anyway, humans still want, information. They want that human connection so that they feel that they can trust the source. But I'm with you guys. I think you have to ride the wave, surf this AI thing. I've embraced it fully. I think it's a tool. I think when the printing press came out, people freaked out. You can't make that much print.
Mhm.
It's going to be crazy. It'll ruin society. And now here we are, just centuries later with another wave of this is too much, too soon, too fast. But I think as long as AI is a tool in the meteorologist's hand, we are good to go. I'm not going to hand the reins over at any time in the near future, but I am more than happy for the help because in 2025, we are doing more weather recordings, more weather forecasts, more weather you fill in the blanks than we have ever done in our business. So if I can get a little help from Robbie the robot, I'm happy to take it.
Robbie the robot. That's a good one.
And now that we're into our last couple of minutes here before we wrap things up, since we've talked so much about the heat, had to go around the horn and find everybody's cool down spot. Rich, you might have already covered this with your trip on Lake St. Clair.
Lake St. Clair is beautiful because, for those who don't understand the geography of the Great Lakes, Lake Huron flows into the St. Clair River. The St. Clair River becomes Lake St. Clair, and then Detroit River into Lake Erie. So Lake St. Clair is notoriously shallow. It can be quite dangerous out there because it is a shallow lake. But in terms of the recreational opportunities, it's fishing and boating, and it's really, really great. But I just want to put a serious spin on it that I believe we had 6 fatalities here in Michigan over the holiday weekend with drownings and water-related injury. It's dangerous out there. Inland lakes, the big rivers. I don't know. I say it all the time in front of a live camera. Be very, very cautious because it can turn serious very quickly out there.
That's a good point. Emily, what's your cool down spot down there in Chicago?
So cool down spot, of course, Lake Michigan, but I actually found a new website that as a mom has me very excited. And I'm going to list it off for everybody that's listening. It's called mykidslist.com/splashpads. And across the west suburbs, the northwest suburbs, this site lists all of the splash pads that are available,
Wow.
ones that are free, ones that have a small fee with them. So I'm always looking for different things to do with my girl. And that site has been such a lifesaver just when we don't want to go to the big lake. So it's been a good resource for us. And I've been trying to kind of push that out because I think a lot of people don't know about it, but there's likely something similar to that in a lot of different communities. So it's something to look for.
I love that. All right, we'll try to
That's
put the
great.
link up to that as well in our show notes a little later on. And I'll wrap it up by saying that I'm just a few days away from heading up to one of my favorite cool down spots in Wisconsin, which is Door County. It's a great place to go and cool down. It is in far northeastern Wisconsin. Any farther, and I'm in Rich's neck of the woods up there into the UP of Michigan. And it's a peninsula, so it is surrounded by water, boating everywhere. Probably going to take the pontoon boat out, a rental. I don't own any boats, but get out on the water and get up to a little town called Sister Bay, where you can get a wonderful breakfast at a restaurant. It's a Swedish themed restaurant, and it has a very environmentally friendly grass roof. And do you guys know how they keep the grass trimmed on the roof?
Oh, so
Yes.
don't tell me scissors.
No, goats. They have goats. They
Oh,
have goats that go up on the roof during the day, nibble away at the grass, and keep the grass roof in fantastic shape.
Awesome.
Uh,
Awesome.
so, so there you go. I've got a lot of fun stuff ahead and some great cool down ideas. Any last words before we wrap things up with our episode 4?
no, I think we're on a good run. This is exciting. We're in summer, and let's all just try to embrace the heat as long as we can find ways to stay cool.
I love
There you
that.
go. Me too. You're right. It'll be cold and snowy before you know it. And of course,
Yes.
when it is, we will talk about it right here on the Isobar, the highs and lows of meteorology.